Well, good morning. This is one of those days when it would just be super if all of our regular members were here along with all of our visitors. And guys, boy, it is great to see so many, but it's always, it never fails when all the visitors show up. Some of our people aren't able to be here or whatever the case may be. So, but we're grateful that so many are here visiting with us, and it's a blessing. And to hear the racket from the little one is a blessing as well. So don't ever fret about that, at least while I'm up here anyway, because sometimes she may be saying more intelligent stuff than I am. But anyway, so it's great to see everybody here. It's been a great morning so far, and I hope it continues to be that way. You know, controversy is something that seems to kind of abound in our world, isn't it? In fact, I think that's part of the plan, is to keep controversy going, because that is what kind of drives. When there's controversy, there's two sides, right? There's going to be the side that believes one way and the side that believes the other. And so that is something that I think drives a lot of unfortunate aspects of our nation, is controversy, is those kinds of things. So whether it's political, public controversy, such as impeachment or something like that, or whether it's personal controversy, such as divorce or some kind of issue there, it is everywhere. Disagreements and arguments, they seem to be all over the land, don't they? And it's not just confined to Washington. It's not just confined to certain states or towns or areas. It's stuff that happens in the church. It's stuff that happens within our homes. It's just everywhere we turn, it seems like controversy is there. Some people seek wisdom to overcome these controversies. The assumption is that if we just knew enough, or if we heard the right evidence, we would all agree. But that hardly settles controversy. Any of you remember the O.J. Simpson trial? Boy, that was a highlight of my school years, right? Watching, and I still to this day can't figure out why in classroom I was watching that Bronco go down the road. But watching the O.J. Simpson chase, they called it, and then the trials, you go back to those trials and they prove that very fact that I've started off with. You had one jury that found him not guilty, and then you had another jury that found him responsible for 2 deaths. So there was controversy involved, and there still is tension involved with that case and with that whole ordeal. And so that's something that's going to go on forever. James, the Lord's brother, wrote his letter during a time of controversy. He probably wrote early in the New Testament age. Some scholars contend that his was the first epistle written. But if so, he wrote during a time of intense controversy among Christians. And some contended that all Gentiles must be circumcised in order to be Christians. You can go to Acts chapter 15 and you can read about that. That was some things that was going around at the time. And then Paul and Barnabas, they disputed this, and they did so in a very sharp way. And church leaders, they gathered in Jerusalem in order to discuss this matter. And James, perhaps writing in the midst of this controversy, he has some interesting things to say about real wisdom, about the peace that comes from wisdom. So let's take a look at James's words here in the text. James chapter 3, verses 13 to 18. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie about the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly. It is sensual. It is demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. What a passage. James discusses a wisdom that is based on a lifestyle, not on knowledge, not on experience, but a lifestyle. James says this wisdom creates peace. He says it leads to righteousness. James does not say that wisdom is found in settling all of our disagreements. It's not what he says. Wisdom is not even found in resolving all of our controversies. Instead, wisdom is demonstrated in a life that reflects a Christ-like attitude. So how can we develop that wisdom that James says will lead to peace? Well, the first thing we can do is confront the attitudes that are within us. James tells us about the wisdom of the world. That wisdom is full of jealousy, it's full of arrogance and selfish ambition. When you face controversy, the first thing to do is to go inside yourself. You go inside your own heart to be sure that first your motives are pure. It's too often when we face disagreements that we're worried about proving how smart we are. Or we're trying to show others that we have the answer. In other words, our pride gets in the way. And then the controversy is worsened as disagreements turn into battles. And those battles turn into wars. Boy, that's relevant today, isn't it? That's James's point, you see. When we use earthly wisdom, we get caught up in disorder in every evil practice. People who have good intentions but fail to confront the attitude within themselves, that often causes more problems. Those individuals often cause more problems because of the tone they take in the middle of controversy. And so we have to check ourselves. You see, when we fail to confront the attitudes within, we go into battle unprepared. You see, so many things are symptoms of a bigger issue, and they're not the issue themselves. And James discusses that in his book quite a bit. This is true, certainly, if the controversy is nothing more than a matter of opinion, such as when to have worship service, such as when to have the Lord's Supper, whether it be before or after the sermon. All of these things that our great church families bicker and fight about quite often. Sadly, I've seen and heard of more churches disrupted over opinions than anything else. And always this was because someone or someone else wanted to prove how wise they were, and they insisted on getting their way. Well, using worldly wisdom, because that's exactly what that was, using worldly wisdom, well, it caused disorder to follow. People who were not evil, they got themselves caught up into all kinds of evil practices. And that's something that we have to stop doing. And we can't stop doing that until we check and confront the attitudes that are within us. And until we do that, these silly spats among Christians, among fellowships, among our own brothers and sisters within our own confines of our buildings are going to suffer. But we must confront the attitudes within us, even if the battle is over something serious. It's not just for the little things. It's for the big things too. The big things, like women's roles in worship, like whether or not we are to gather on Sunday, whether or not instruments are authorized in worship. All of these things that are of a more serious nature, we have to check our attitudes within when it comes to them as well. Sadly, I've seen these kinds of things be blown out of proportion when they didn't have to, even then. Even when the stakes are high, even when doctrinal purity is at risk, we have to start by going into our hearts, and we have to clear out the worldliness that is in it if we want progress to be made. You see, James knows that being right on doctrine and wrong in our attitudes or wrong in our actions means that our doctrine's going to lose credibility. That's one worth writing down, I think. He knows that that's the case. Our words need to be credible. And if our words are credible, there has to be a change. There has to be a check. There has to be a confrontation within ourselves. They have to be for real. They have to be authentic. Who are the wise? Well, the spiritually wise are those who look into their own hearts before they try to resolve differences, whether they are simple differences or serious differences. We have to check and confront our attitudes within us. And then we proceed. Unfortunately, it's too often we get those backwards. We proceed first. And then, if even then, at some point afterwards, we check our hearts. It can't be that way. Next, I want to discuss that in order to gain wisdom that leads to peace, we must consider others first. We have to do that. In contrast to the wisdom of the world, James points us to a wisdom that has several characteristics. The interesting thing about all of these qualities is that they have to do with how we treat people. So, we are to be pure. That is, that we are to be set apart. We are to be holy in our actions. If we are truly wise, even when we are in controversy, we will not let Satan get a foothold by caving in and using worldly methods. This would include ugly words, cruel words. We talked all morning about the tongue. That's certainly in play here. It would include hateful actions or statements. When we use these means, we prove that we are not wise. Have we ever heard the saying, it's better to have someone think you're dumb than to open your mouth and remove all that doubt? Well, it works that way with wisdom. Wisdom means we act appropriately. We respond appropriately. But we do so in a righteous way. Second, we are to be peaceable. We are to be peaceable. Some people in the kingdom seem to be just spoiling for a fight, don't they? Have y'all ever met any of those people? I see a couple heads nodding. Oh, yeah, we've dealt with those people. You walk in the door and you don't even want to make eye contact because you know that it's almost like you can just feel it when you're around them. They just want trouble. They're ready to tackle. They're ready to whip anyone over any issue. But James would say that those kind of people are simply not wise. They are worldly, and they're going to cause more division and evil. They're not going to cause less. Next, we are to be gentle in our actions. Even if we are in disagreement over serious doctrinal issues, a truly wise Christian will be kind and will be gentle to those who disagree, even if they are wrong. That's just the way it ought to be. I heard somebody put a quote on Facebook the other day, and I don't remember the exact quote, but it had to do with sometimes it's okay to consider that you may not be right all the time. And the first thing that went through my mind was, well, the only time I hear somebody tell me that is when they're wrong, right? I guess maybe you don't get it, but a lot of times wrong people like to say stuff like that. But the fact is, you can disagree. Someone can be wrong. It doesn't mean you have to be ugly. It doesn't mean you have to treat them with hate. They can be doctrinally wrong. And guess what? Your response to that can also be doctrinally wrong. And it happens a lot. This is how Jesus treated his opponents. You remember? That's how we should treat ours as well. Next, we should be reasonable. This doesn't mean gullible, but it does mean open-minded. We need to be open-minded. Far too much damage has been done from people who just won't be open-minded, who won't just think that maybe it's not quite this way. Maybe it doesn't have to be quite this way. Maybe, as I said a while ago, maybe I'm not right. Maybe I need to hear another opinion about an issue. You see, those who disagree with me may be wrong, but perhaps I need to hear and understand what it is that they're saying. Worldly wisdom is closed-minded. It already has all the facts. It already has all the answers. The wisdom from above, though, is reasonable. This means I consider the other person's and their viewpoint. Does that mean that I have to change mine? No, it doesn't. But let me tell you something. You can get a whole lot further with teaching someone who's wrong if you can gain information or perspective on why they are where they are. That happens with my daughter quite a bit. Admittedly. My daughter is kind of a complex person. Beyond the fact that she's an almost 15-year-old girl. She's a kind of complex person. And there are times when I get myself a little out of control and I snap off or charge something against her or do something that really, if I'd have just taken a moment and heard the reason and the why and gotten a little bit of context around what it is that's going on, maybe I just wouldn't have reacted the way that I did. As parents, we have to be open-minded, don't we? As parents, we have to be willing to consider others first, don't we? Guess what? That's what we need to do as Christians, too. I consider the other person and their viewpoint. James also says that we are to be full of mercy if we are to be wise. Think about this for a minute, because it's important. Who is it that needs mercy? Have you ever thought about that? Who is it that needs mercy? Well, it's those who are mistaken. It's those who are wrong. They're the ones that need mercy. Maybe you've never thought about that. People who are without sin do not need what? Mercy. So James is telling us that wise people know others may be mistaken, knows others may be wrong, but still extend mercy and forgiveness to them. There's no room in godly wisdom for holding grudges. There's no room in godly wisdom for this air of superiority. We are to be full of mercy. And then James goes on to add that we are to be without partiality. We're to be without partiality. Other versions translate this as unwavering. That is, not taking sides, not entering into the controversy with prejudice. It's the idea of standing solidly with fairness towards all parties involved. Let's go back to our parenting days, if you will. We've got some young parents here today. What do our kids like to do sometimes? They like to come into the room and they like to say, "Mom, can I?" Or "Dad, can I?" And then mom or dad may say no. And then, when the other party, the spouse, is unaware and unexpectant, they'll come into the room and that sweet child will come up to them and say, what? "Dad, can I?" Or "Mom, can I?" They know that mom or dad has already said no, but what's the hope? The hope is to create a little controversy. The hope is to gain a partner. Because maybe dad's a little more lenient than mom. Or maybe mom's a little more reasonable than dad. And so they want to gain someone to be on their side, because then they can use that leverage. That happens in our families, don't it? It happens with our kids. It happens with grown adults in our families, don't it? When it comes to brothers and sisters, how estates should be divided, how all kinds of stuff should be done, how health care should be administered, all kinds of things. Does that happen in the church too? Do people go about in our churches looking for conflict, hoping to gain partners in their conflict? Oh, you better believe they do. You better believe they do. But that's not right. You see, we need to stand solid. We need to stand firm. We need to be fair towards everyone. He concludes all of this with a simple command, and that is to avoid hypocrisy. Avoid hypocrisy. Now, James would not consider anyone wise who had not learned to clean up his own heart first and then treated others with respect and kindness, even if they disagreed. That's the only way that he would consider to be godly wisdom, righteous wisdom. Anyone can get along with those who agree. That's not the hard part, is it? That's why parenting is so hard. In fact, let's just throw it out there. That's why so many kids are so messed up today. Is because it's easier to just agree with your kids. It's easier to be their friend. It's harder when your teenage daughter is mad at you and don't like you, and your preteen son is the same way at times. That's difficult, isn't it? But guess what? We've still got a job to do. And my job's not to be my child's friend. My job is to prepare my child for the world. My job is to help my child get to heaven in a world that wants her damned and him damned. That's what my job is. We have to be mindful of that. Anybody can get along with people who agree with them. The test of wisdom is what kind of person we are when we face controversy, when we face disagreement. Finally, James finishes the passage by talking of sowing and harvesting. The seed to be sown is peace. When we face our own inner attitudes and then we put others first, we are sowing peace among people. That's what we're doing. And this allows us to keep the discussion going. Jesus demonstrated this quality in his life. And really, James is just telling us how to be like him. How many times did Jesus eat with Pharisees? How many times did he talk with Pharisees? How many times did he reach out to Pharisees in hopes of changing them? Boy, he did that, didn't he? Jesus did this by using the kind of wisdom that James has described in this text. By sowing peace, Jesus laid a foundation. He laid a foundation for a harvest that would come. And this tells us something about our goals in controversial situations. Sometimes we're not going to convince the other party that they're wrong. But by maintaining a Christ-like spirit, we can leave room for a discussion later that might just sway them. If we use worldly wisdom instead, we may convince them of our doctrine, yeah, sure. But we also may lose them due to our actions. And so when in the middle of controversy, what do? We should sow peace. That's exactly what we should do. This is done with mercy. It's done with gentleness and so on. When peace is sown, there is one inevitable result. So the question, how do we get people to do what is right? How can we persuade them or convince them that they need to change? Well, it starts by sowing peace, by demonstrating the attitudes that James has described here in the text. And when peace is sown, the one result follows, and that fruit is righteousness. That's what happens as a result. The way to change and shape people is not by proving how smart we are and winning all the arguments. There are a whole lot of preachers in this world that are more educated and scholared than I am. Does that mean anything? No, sometimes I think it's a disadvantage, to be honest with you. Because you can get so much education that you just become blind to the simplistic nature of God's Word. And so it is. Doesn't matter how smart you are. Ain't that nice? That means that we all can do it. Doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't mean that you win all the arguments. The way to shape people is to demonstrate genuine wisdom by our actions and by our words. James says that by sowing peace, we will achieve righteousness in the harvest. Of course, the hard part about a harvest is that it takes time, doesn't it? No one sows the seed on Monday and they expect to be picking fruit on Tuesday. It doesn't happen it doesn't happen like that in the physical world. It doesn't happen like that in the spiritual realm either. As we contend for our opinions, or as we contend for God's revealed will, we must sow peace. We must know that God will bless the seed that we sow with a harvest of righteousness. And that will be in our lives, and that will be in the lives of those with whom we interact. And so that's our duty. Our duty is to sow peace and wait for the harvest to come. God will provide that in due time. So here's the big question for the day. We've run a little long. The little one's ready to go. And that's all right too. What's the big question for the day? Are you wise? You know, really, she's done better than some adults I've been in front of. She does a great job, doesn't she? She's very patient with me. Are you wise? Too often we mistake wisdom for the ability to speak well or the ability to persuade. I find it interesting that James leaves those qualities out of his definition of the wisdom from heaven altogether. That's not even part of it. It's not based on our education. It's not based on our IQ. And all I can say is thank goodness. It's not based on how much experience we have. You see, wisdom is based on how well we have learned to imitate the Christ who died for us. That's what wisdom is. So are you wise? Do you still let selfish ambition and arrogance, does all that stuff still rule in your relationships? Or have you learned to be pure? Have you learned to be gentle? Have you learned to be merciful? And on the list goes. This is why God asks you to surrender your life to Him at the very beginning. That's why He does it. Why are faith and repentance and baptism so important? Well, it's because they reflect one who has looked inside and found sin. And because they reflect one who wants to become more like Jesus. Repentance, belief, baptism. That's the reflection of somebody who wants to be like Christ. They show a surrender to God's way of doing things from the very start. And that's the way that we need to be. So instead of arguing with God, we need to surrender to God. If His will and His way is for us to do something, that's what we need to do. If it's for us to be some way, that's how we need to be. And if we're in conflict with that, guess what? We're wrong. So we need to do better. We need to prove to others how wise we really are by living the same kind of life that James describes and by watching God bless the world around us with a harvest of righteousness. Let's stand and sing.